Hello, everyone, and welcome back to SALT Talks. My name is John Darcy. I'm the managing director of SALT, which is a global thought leadership forum and networking platform at the intersection of finance, technology, and public policy. SALT Talks are a digital interview series that we started in 2020 with leading investors, creators, and thinkers. And our goal on these SALT Talks is the same as our goal at our SALT conferences, which we're excited to resume in September of 2021 in New York City. And that's to provide a window into the mind of subject matter experts, as well as provide a platform for what we think are big ideas that are shaping the future. And we're very excited today to welcome Ed Hajim to SALT Talks. Ed is the son of a Syrian immigrant and is a seasoned Wall Street executive with more than 50 years of investment experience. He's held senior management positions with Capital Group, EF Hutton, Lehman Brothers, all before becoming chairman and CEO of Furman Selz. Hajim has been the co-chairman of ING Barings, the Americas region, chairman and CEO of ING Aeltus Group, and ING Furman Selz Asset Management after that acquisition, and chairman and CEO of MLH Capital. Today, he is the chairman of High Vista, a Boston-based money management company. Hosting today's talk is Anthony Scaramucci, the founder and managing partner of Skybridge Capital, a global alternative investment firm. Anthony's also the chairman of SALT, and I believe, it's been something like 20 years, Anthony, you mentioned, since you stepped into Ed's office when you were at your previous business, Oscar Capital.
All right.
Look forward to talking about that.
Take it easy, John Darcy. I've been lying about my age, okay? You didn't have to let everybody know that I know Hajim for that long. The truth be told, right before 9/11, I went to see Ed. He probably won't remember the visit as well as I do, because at that time he still is a legendary person on Wall Street. And after reading your book, one of my reactions to you, Ed, and I said this to my old professor, Saul Gittleman, you are the O positive of relationships, meaning you're like the universal donor. You can meet people, find something in common with them, and build a relationship. And that's one of the big takeaways from your book. But I remember our meeting very vividly because we were in the process of selling our company. One of your colleagues, Bill Turgeon, brought us into your office, and you gave me great advice, which I often give to other people, which was, do the right thing for your employees, pick the place to land them in a way where it'll help their careers, and that'll turn out to be a good decision. We ultimately sold that business to Neuberger Berman. Jeff Lane was running Neuberger at that time. But on to you. I want to hold up the book. It's On the Road Less Traveled. The book is an unlikely journey from the orphanage to the boardroom. I got to tell you, sir, it was a brilliant read. I'm not saying that to flatter you. I read a lot of books. We have a lot of authors on. But your story is remarkable and unique. So I'd like to ask you that first question. Tell us how you grew up, Ed.
It's a story that starts prior to my birth, when my father came over as an immigrant in 1900. And they settled in Bensonhurst in Brooklyn. Dad became fascinated as a young man with something called radio. And by 1918, had taken a number of technical courses, got involved in RCA, and for the next, the one roaring 20s did very, very well. I have a picture of him with an airplane. He supposedly owned buildings on 110th Street. And in 29, he was obviously margined 10-1 like everybody else. And in the next 4 years, between 1929 and 33, lost everything. And those of us who know friends who have declined in personal wealth and so forth, no, it has an enormous impact. And when you lose everything, I mean everything, at the same time, his most important parent, his mother, died. And she supposedly died of a broken heart. She was involved in the community, and community went into difficulty, and she died. In 1933, he decided that basically he was either going to commit suicide or drive across country with his last possession, which was his car. Lucky for me, he decided not to commit suicide and drive across country. He stopped at a cousin's home in St. Louis, and he met their fifth child, who was an 18-year-old young lady 15 years his junior, and they got married in 2 weeks, which is another story. Anyway, they proceeded to California. They found out streets were not paved with gold. Dad had trouble finding a job. Supposedly the only happiness happened 3 years later when I was born in 1936 at the Queen of Angels Hospital. It lasted a few months, and they found out that having another mouth to feed was not a good deal. 3 years later, difficulty really with my father was a very difficult man, having all the demons from his decline in wealth. My mother, at 24 years old, divorced my father and got custody of me and took me from Los Angeles back to her home in St. Louis. She was not welcomed in St. Louis. Her father had five children at the time, and he was not glad to see a divorced 24-year-old woman with a 3-year-old child. My father got $5 a week alimony and child support, and he got Sunday visiting rights. On the book cover, you'll see the picture of my father and I in a car, 1936 Roadster, driving on Highway 66. One of the visiting rights, he got there, he found me so-called unkept, and instead of taking me to a movie or to the playground, he got back on Highway 36 and kept driving to Los Angeles. Told me that I'd never see my mother again. A few weeks later, he said she died, and that's how I kept it for another 57 years, thinking that she had passed away. Dad and I spent a couple of years together, although he was a merchant marine at the time, a radio operator. I spent time with a neighbor most of the time. And when the war started, he was either volunteered or was drafted as an officer in the Merchant Marines. And I didn't see him for 4.5 years. He put me with a Catholic welfare agency, which resulted in my being at 5 Catholic foster homes, 5 schools, which was an interesting experience. The war ended. Dad came back on the East Coast. I made the trip across country. We spent some time in the Sloan House on 34th Street at YMCA, which still exists. Wasn't a pleasant place at the time. Then a hotel room in Coney Island while he sought land-based work. It didn't work. He had to go back to sea. Then I ended up in 2 Jewish orphanages, one in Far Rockaway. When I aged out of that one, I ended up in a very good orphanage in Yonkers, New York, about 4 blocks from Exton High School. So 15 or 20 different places in the first 18 years. A real Ijira, as they call it, a trip from Mecca to Medina, and many stops along the way. And the relationships from the foster homes ranged from being abusive and cold to warm and caring. So, what I got out of that were a lot of disadvantages, which in my book I try to put across to people like me, resulted in some advantages. And that's sort of the thumbnail sketch. It's in the book. It's better well done than me just running through all those pages very quickly. But the childhood was very difficult, and some people call it Dixonian. But as I say, it wasn't my fault. And I had people along the way that did help me. Writing the book made me recognize there were some very good people along the way, which basically helped me get through the period. Dad came in and out of my life, and at 17, I make the key decision of my life. I decided that 1, I was going to go to a private college, no matter what it took. And I just lucky got that done. And 2, I was going to take my background and hide it, which the psychologists today would say would be a disaster. But for me, it was the answer. I was going to draw that line at 18 years old, go to a college and never tell anybody my story. And I kept that a secret for 55 years. And that's another story.
So I want to go directly to what you attribute to be one of the cornerstones of your success, and that's your wife, Barbara. And you write some beautiful passages about her in the book. But one of the things that is striking to people that are married is the unconditionality of love between a spouse, or 2 spouses, I should say. We see that relationship often with children, but you have that relationship with your wife. And since we're here to also embarrass you, just give me one. There's a beautiful picture of you right here. So I'm going to look at this strapping young man in
I'm a hunk. Come on, go ahead. I'm a hunk.
Yeah, I mean, come on. That's 1959. Okay, there you are, looking like a super hunk there. So tell us about the courtship with Barbara, how she came into your life, and her influence.
It's a long story, and I hope you can put up with it. But that picture was taken when I was an ensign in the Navy, our first trip across the ocean, and stopped in Hawaii, and somebody took that picture, and I thought it was kind of humorous. Barbara, the story about Barbara and I really is you really can't tell a story like this. And by the way, at the end of the book, I have my 4 P's, and the third P is partnership, partners. And there's a thing called P1. If you truly can find P1 early in life, someone who you can support, who will support you, someone who you can share your life with, it really solves at least half the problem. And the Barbara situation it's unfortunately a long story. It starts in 1957 when I was the editor I was founding editor of a humor magazine at the University of Rochester. I felt that the school was a place where fun went to die, and I was going to create a humor magazine. That's a whole story. Anyway, the next editor was a boy named David Melnick, who was a year behind me. And in order to transfer the information on the humor magazine, I went to his house in Staten Island. And while I was there talking about the humor magazine, his 13 or 14-year-old little pigtail sister was buzzing around, and we kept chasing her away. After I left the house, she told her mother and father that she was going to marry me. And of course, she there had a teenage crush. They didn't think twice about it. 7 years later, I was at the business school, my second year. Phone rang, spring. It was David Melnick. He said, well, I'm getting married and I want you to be my best man. I said, great. Hung the phone up, realized I did not have the money to fly to San Francisco where he was in school. So I quickly called the placement office and I said, have you got anything in California? I don't care what they do. I need a ticket. And the lady there was a buddy of mine. Actually, we had dated for a while. And so she said, come on over. There's no availability, but there's a company here called Capital Research that's in the mutual fund business. I had never taken an investment course. I wanted to manage a business. I didn't want to go in the investment business. They said, we'll put you outside the chairman's door and you can accost them and see if you can get the invitation to the dinner. They invite a bunch of people to dinner, then they cut the group in half and they invite half out for another interview in Los Angeles. I got there, stood outside the door. Jim Fullerton, the chairman, came out. And the way he tells the story is he learned more about me in 10 minutes than he learned all day long by anybody, any hour interview. Anyway, they invited me to dinner. I made the cut. I got the chance to go to California. I was on my way to the airport and I got a phone call from Barbara's mother who said, would I take little Barbara to the wedding? And I said, sure. At Idlewild Airport, which is now Kennedy, we passed each other a dozen times. I finally had a PA system, and the little 13-year-old turned out to be a 20-year-old striking young lady. And we got on the airplane. She fell asleep on my shoulder. We went to the wedding. We danced. We had a good time. And I appeared the next Monday morning at Capital Research, hungover, not interested, only interested in one thing, which was to get out of there. The first thing he did was give me a battery of psychological tests, which I flunked. I can spend my time on Capital Research because it was a great, great day. Anyway, I finally got out of there, went back to Harvard. And a couple of weeks later, I invited her up for a weekend. And she quickly said yes. And I said, okay, I'll fix you up with somebody your own age. And I did. And then a couple of weeks later, I didn't have a date. So I figured, well, I invited her up and she came up and she spent a weekend with me, very innocent weekend. And I didn't think anything of it. She's a nice little girl, much younger, 7 years younger than I was. So we were all set, ready to take a job on Wall Street. I'd interviewed all the usuals, Goldman Sachs and Kuhn Loeb and Lehman Brothers and Eastman Dillon and so forth. And I was going to take one of those jobs. And there's a long story in there. Anyway, I decided at the last minute to take a job in California, Capital Research, this company that I had no interest in. By the way, I worked for 10 years. Barbara was a teacher in Connecticut. She immediately canceled her job and applied to graduate school at San Francisco State, University of California, San Francisco, got in and went to San Francisco. We dated for about a year, and somewhere along the line under the Golden Gate Bridge, I proposed, and we were married. So it's an odyssey. I ended up spending 10 years with the company I had no interest in. The only reason I went out there was to be the wedding for her brother. And we're now married 55 years, and we have 3 wonderful children and 8 grandchildren, which is really my legacy. 7 grandsons, by the way. So that's too long a story, but unfortunately, that's the story.
Ed, please, it's a brilliant story, which is why I didn't want to interrupt 1 second of it. And you regale some of it in the book. I'm not a pop psychologist, but when I read your book, I made an observation to myself in a note, and I'm going to ask you this, and you know, I just want you to react to it. You know, some people that grow up the way you did in a fractured situation, moving about, can develop trust issues, can develop fear-based relationships, not want to wade deeply into the pool. But you managed to overcome all of that as it relates to your marriage, but also the business relationships. And I'd like you to get into the 4 Ps if you don't mind. I don't want to ruin the book for people because I certainly want them to read it, but I want them to get a sense for your ethos. How were you able to break out of the shifting winds and sands of your childhood to live this anchored in such a stable, great career arc and family arc?
You know, I can go into it in depth, but if I want to simply say why, the problem with most people that have backgrounds like me that spiral down is they become victims. They become victims of their circumstance. I refused, no matter what happened to me, and by the way, in my entire life, not to be a victim, always to ask what's next. I've tried to delve in why I took that posture, possibly because my father was a victim. He always complained. It was always somebody else's fault. And children tend to do the opposite of their parents. So maybe that was the reason. But all through my life, no matter what happened to me, and I had a wonderful question last night at Alfred University. A young man asked me, you know, what was the hardest thing that I've ever had to do in my life? And I said, it's basically something where you do everything right and it still comes out wrong. Spend 7 years at Lehman Brothers, turn 2 divisions around, and they still throw you out in the street because you don't get along with the boss. Or, you know, you go to a Nantucket and you apply to the golf club and they reject you, you know, even though you're a good guy and you sit next to the guy who's a trustee, you know, who recommends you and so forth. So in many respects, I'm pitching this by my big story.
John Dorsey wants me to landscape the golf club that he's a member of. I just want to point that out to you, Ed. Okay, I'm going to tell you what we're up against here, but we'll go ahead, keep going. But you built a golf club on Nantucket, so we'll go into that in a second too. But tell, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I had to throw Dorsey under the bus there temporarily. Go ahead.
Don't be a victim. No matter what anybody does to you, try to think of what to do next and get out of it, you know, whatever it is. And in my case, it really has paid off because in many respects, you know, my Lehman Brothers story is a great story because I really did everything right for the first time in my life. I mean, I communicated with people. I actually made the first woman vice president of Lehman Management Company, blah, blah, blah. But Glucksman and I didn't get along and he forced me out of my division and I left there and I got my dream job afterwards. And the same thing with the golf course. Being rejected is the best thing that ever happened to me. Because I don't know what you're doing, John, but building a golf course is one of the great experiences of all times. I can talk about legacy. You know, all the companies I worked for, except for Capital Research.
Well, it's also the best golf course on Nantucket. I don't know if you remember.
By far.
I don't know if you remember.
We're not allowed to say that, but
okay, all right. I'm sorry. Well, I'm not really much of a golfer, but I don't know if you remember Jack Schneider from Allen and Company.
Oh yeah.
He took me there. He had several friends of his that were members there, and it was absolutely breathtaking.
And Anthony shot, I think, 143.
Well, that was on the first 9.
And they made the turn.
I shot a 143 on the first 9. Let's not talk about the entire score. Of course, I did think that you had a score. You were scoring points by swinging. I didn't realize it was the opposite, but we could talk about that later. Go to the 4 Ps. But one of the things I want to emphasize, we have a lot of young people listening to our SALT Talks. No victimhood, no self-pity. You take life as it comes and you do your best to see the good things in life and you come at it from a position of gratitude, which you obviously have indicated in the book. But tell us about the 4 Ps.
Let me give you just, again, you said it so well. Don't be a victim. Don't look for self-pity. Don't look for anything special. Failure early in life is a gift. Think about that. Doing everything right and have things go wrong is a gift. You learn from that. And then, because in many respects, all of the mistakes, the problems that I had turned out much better because they occurred. The 4 Ps in my mind, and this is really, you got to buy me a bottle of good red wine. We can spend the evening on it. I truly believe, and this is this is my own way down deep thought process. You only have one constant in your life. It's your inner voice. And you must develop a language for your inner voice. This is why I want young people to be talking to them. They talk to themselves, but a lot of it's noise. That's why I developed the 4 Ps. If you say to yourself, what are my passions? And passions are an overused word. I know that. It's what are your talents? What are your interests? And how do they frame with today's world? What are your principles? What are your principles? You know, what lines won't you cross? I mean, I started in the Catholic school, so, you know, I got the golden rule with the golden ruler on the knuckles, you know, and they basically made me understand what the good Lord wanted me to do. So that was very good. But principles change throughout your entire life, just like passions. You know, passions evolve. And I make the point in passions, I started out with, you know, baseball, basketball, math, science, and girls. And, you know, that morphed at college. And I can go through that in length if you'd like. Principles the same way morphed. You know, early on, I had the second golden rule, which is he who has the goal rules. I had great desire to become financially independent. And everybody that faces that fork in the road, how much of your effort you want to spend on achieving financial resources. And I had spent a lot of effort on it until I was about 47. At the end of Lehman Brothers, I kind of had just enough money to sort of get through. And I would take a job that I really wanted, which was to work with a small firm and have fun. Freedom became more important than money at that point in time. And of course, later on, the most important thing, which is to now, is gratitude. Really, gratitude is very important. Now, the third P, partners. And besides finding P1, you find you're only as good as the people you surround yourself with. I look back at my failures is because I either didn't have a partner or I had the wrong partner. Whenever I had the right partner, is a big, tall, 6'5" guy from Dartmouth. His name is Steve Bletcher, who constantly came to my office and said, "Don't do that. You can do this. It's okay." And he took care of all the 4-letter firms, and you would associate with this: SEC, NASD, New York Stock Exchange. Anybody who came in, he handled it. I was able to do the things. I use my partner. One thing: find partners who do things you can't do but need to be done. Find partners things that you can do, but they do it better than you do it. Then find partners who do things that you can do very well, but you don't want to do. So what you end up with is things you like to do that you do well. Think about that. And that's why I structured my partners. Now, I have a secret for that. Now, the fourth thing is plans. Plans, man plans and God laughs. That's a Chinese expression that the Yiddish people took on. But, in many respects, it's not true. I want people to write plans because at least they know where they wanted to go. And then take those plans and think about the context of your life. You want to have some fun, spend an evening thinking about somebody born in 1900 like my father and someone born in 1936 like me, the difference in our life. Context. Find a wave or a cycle or a trend or something that basically is going to go up during your lifetime. And if you can find that and get the wind at your back, and it fits with your passions and your principles and your partners, boy, you've got it. I like to marry those first 3 to the fourth one. And I always kid about this. A friend of mine, loved Alaska, loved gold mining, was helping the Indians up there. Everything was going fine until he married someone who hated the cold. Doesn't work. There's that kind of thing that you sort of have to deal with. Those are the 4 Ps. I used it at Rochester almost in every one of my I made 70 graduation speeches. And I used it most of the time because I really thought that those, not necessarily the 4 Ps, but use a language with yourself that you can go back to. And of course, the 5th P is purpose, which all those things, underlie. They underlie purpose for everything you're doing. And so I find this, and if you can concentrate and look at your passions, and my passions changed. I mean, in college, I wanted to be a physicist for a while. But by my junior year, I started to recognize what really turned me on. My real passion was helping people. I started the Humor magazine, and I took on partners, helping people be better than they think they can, help them to exceed their own expectations. That really got me excited. I didn't know it at the time. Looking back in my business career, I started to recognize that's what turned me on. And you say, why have I made good relationships? Because if people believe that you're really interested in them, makes life a lot easier. Not easy. And then, of course, you marry that with the most difficult thing that people do in our business is, you can reach great heights if you don't worry about who gets the credit. So if someone feels that you're really interested in them and they're going to get the credit, If you have a couple hundred of those people surrounding you, you will do really well.
So, I mean, again, these are great pieces of advice. I want to go back to the book for a second because you live this in the book. Take me back to the Nantucket story because you're 56, 58 years old. You're in that ballpark. It's 1994. You're opening the golf course. Take us through the process of getting the zoning approval on that ancient New England island, if you will, and how you were able to make it all happen.
It's one of the things I left out of the book in many respects because we were bidding against a very prominent other person in getting the property. And we had to pay a little more than we finally a knockout bid at $8 million for the property. And we had constant covenants in there in our bid, which the last one was, if we didn't get golf permitted, then we would basically not buy the property. Well, he took that out on his last bid, so we had to take it out. And I had, raised $10 million with 50 people at $200,000 a piece. And I go back to them and say, we may not have a golf course. We'll just give you 5 acres a piece. Anyway, and so we started the process with all of the agencies. And of course, Nantucket was easy because this property was zoned what they call R2. We could have put 150 units on that property. And we decided, we showed them a program. We said, here's what we can do, 128 units. Here's what we should do, 60 units. Here's what we're going to do, 5 units, a clubhouse plus 4 cottages. And so Nantucket ran us through pretty quickly. But Massachusetts, we got caught finally with a endangered species woman who was in charge of that. And she was worried about the Harrier hawk. And so we had to spend about $800,000 doing all kinds of things for the Harrier hawk, which went on for 10 years. But anyway, we had about 4 foot of paper in the permitting process and, $2 million. But we got the job done. Took us about almost over a year to get the thing done. And finally, we started with the bulldozers. And on April the 8th, 1995, it looked like the landing, the landing on D-Day with all the backhoes and front hose and bulldozers coming down Milestone Drive. And I still say one of the great things, and I collect a little bit of art, but building a golf course is art with a bulldozer. And moving as little dirt as you can and using as much of the natural undulation, which we could. Fred and I stood up, Fred Green, who deserves all the credit for building the golf course. We built 3 golf courses together, one in Vail, second was Nantucket, the third was in London. But Fred did a fantastic job. He brought in Reese Jones, and the whole thing was covered with 4 or 5 foot of scrub oak. We couldn't even see it when we drove through it. And one day we were standing in the middle of it all. He said, why don't we take it all down? I said, what will it cost? He said, well, probably $250,000 to $500,000. We took it all down and found one of the great, just natural undulation. And so the bulldozers didn't have to do too much work. Anyway, we spent 2 years building the golf course with Reese. It turned out to be the #1 private golf course built in 1997. Our clubhouse also won the #1 award in Golf Magazine. And it was a great experience. And I have been hugged by more women because their husbands moved them to Nantucket than anybody in the Western world. Because, because nobody would come to Nantucket. Just as when I got turned down by Sankaty, I went back to Barbara and said, I think we're going to have to sell a house. She said, no, can't sell a house. Why don't you build a golf course? You built one in Vail. I said, Vail's got land. Nantucket doesn't have land. So I went out and I found the land, invited Fred out. And the rest is history. We have basically changed the island. In fact, I give credit to the membership because about 2 years in, first year we had our first charity event. We raised $400,000. People went crazy. We had 13 requests the next year. We said, stop. And we started something called the Children's Charity a couple of years later, which is the only charitable event at the island. We don't allow anything else. Nobody can come to the island and raise money except that one night. And now we're into this almost 20 years. We've put 25 kids through college. We're the largest charity on the island. We support 40 or 50 different charities every year. We made a contribution to the new Boys and Girls Club, to the new hospital. And we've now started my new mini crusade, which is vocational education. We now have through vocational scholarships, welders, chefs. It costs, to go to Thompson Wells, it costs $40,000 a year. So we have 2 college scholarships and 3 or 4 vocational scholarships every year. We hold 1 gala, and I think we raise more money per capita than almost any place I've ever been in. And it's a model I'd love, if I had time, to take it to other clubs around the country, because you really become, instead of golf club, you become an institution. And that really changes everything. And the island, accepts us now as part of their milieu, and I think it's very important. And if I wasn't rejected, we probably never would have built the club. And and I still say one of the great opportunities of all times. You have to finish 9 holes. You go up to the snack bar. You tell Kelly you want a muscle milk or a smoothie or something, and she says, "What's your number?" And you say, "Number 1." And that's the best. That's the greatest compliment anyone could ever have.
I love the story for so many different reasons. There's been a lot of clubs that I frankly have been rejected from over my life, Ed. But I will say this about Nantucket. My first trip to Nantucket, I was at Tufts University, and I obviously had gone to Cape Cod. I took the ferry over to Nantucket, fell in love with the island, and my wife, my first date with her was on the island of Nantucket. And I took her there. We went to the White Elephant for breakfast. And then
the White Elephant's right there. It's actually down the block from my house.
Yeah, the White Elephant, beautiful. And so a few years back, she presented me a map of the island, which was made in the 1870s. It's a beautiful map and it's in my house here. So I have a lot of fondness for Nantucket.
Well, my wife, we got there in 86. We were there for 2 hours. She said, "Get a real estate agent." Being an island lady at Staten Island, Nantucket she just fell in love. And she was one of the prime movers on the Whaling Museum. But we have a map you have to come to our house. We have a map in our house from 1775 of Nantucket, which I bought in London, and have it up there. And another one, we have a couple of maps. I used to collect maps for a while, but my wife fell in love with Nantucket, and she could sit there in our living room in the rain with a smile on her face. So she's just a happy lady in Nantucket.
Well, I got to let John in here. He's got some questions from our audience, but I love the stories, Ed, and I love your life story, and I'm so happy that you were able to put it down into words on the road less traveled. And I'm encouraging all the young people that listen to us, please go out and buy this book. But John, go ahead.
Yeah, so you obviously had a storied career on Wall Street, Ed, at a lot of great organizations, Capital Group, EF Hutton, Lehman Brothers, Furman Selz. What did you learn at any of those stops about things that worked well in terms of organizational culture and process, and some things that you encountered that you wish you could have fixed or that you observed that didn't work?
Well, I learned a process. I mean, I'm an engineer by background, so it's observe, design, do, analyze the results, and so you got to have sort of things you focus on. I do believe the following process. And Lehman Brothers wouldn't agree with this. It's culture first, strategy, people, numbers. And Lehman Brothers always was more focused on the numbers. That's why they made me hire, and thank God they did. This fellow, Steve Bletcher, did all the numbers for me. But I work on culture and strategy. Those two, you could do strategy first and culture second, but it's important. Culture usually eats strategy. If you don't have the right culture, it doesn't work. And in each case, that's what I try to do. Try to produce a culture by being willing, and the Navy taught me this, be willing to do anything that anybody in your shop has done. I was sat on the trading desk. I made sales. I sure as heck did research. I was a research analyst. So running institutional business was really easy. I could relate to any one of them. Now, what I did learn, this is the what's next question, especially in our day and age, you've got to keep asking that. And each time I changed jobs or made a move, it was because what's next? I left Hutton because Furman would not marry my fabulous research department, this banking business. He was an analyst or gophers, they're statisticians, and our bankers, they're people that really work with important people. I said, no, you don't understand. Analysts know more than anybody about companies, and that's what companies want today and tomorrow. And they also want trading. And so he didn't buy that because he was a retail guy, and I understood that because he wanted enough institutional business not to be embarrassed, and I did that. He wanted me to take over retail, and I said retail is okay, the new game in town is institutional. Lehman Brothers was building a 400-seat trading room. And that was the next step in our business. And so I knew that, and Furman was not willing to do that. So I went to Lehman Brothers. And of course, Lehman Brothers, the story's been written too many times. You know the problems there. It's cultural, complete. They're the smartest guys in the world. I mean, I will never forget getting a phone call from one of our Italian partners. He says, "You got to tell me about the economy." I said, "Where are you?" He said, "I'm on the Pope's plane." I mean, and I remember working with Peterson. He would have the Federal Reserve Chairman on hold, talking to somebody else, Kissinger or somebody else. I mean, at lunchtime, you looked at the people coming to lunch. I mean, it was unbelievable. And so it was a sad, sad story when Lehman went down. But what I learned constantly, and with Furman Selz, it was my message was very simple. We're sitting on a lily pad. We're a bunch of frogs. And if it's a good lily pad, other people are going to jump on this lily pad. And slowly but surely it's going to sink. We better jump to another one. So we constantly had to stay moving. During my 15 years there before we got bought by ING, almost half the firms like us went out of business or were merged out. So we stayed in business by continuing to add businesses. I built a money management business from really 40 million to 12 billion in that period before money management was really important to investment banks and so forth. But I learned constantly to keep moving. And by the way, also to constantly give people reason to do their own thing. I mean, they would kid me about another guy. You're bringing him in. You're giving him a desk and telephone. You're going to check him in 6 months. Ed, what are you doing? But that's what really happened. And all my guys really were. And I also credit myself with the compensation problem on Wall Street. For 20 years, I was the highest paid person in the firm 1 year. That was the year we sold to Xerox. Because I really felt I did that when I deserved being paid the most. But then I was not. Because I think that, and by the way, David Kearns at Xerox told me that when I merged him. He said, I've never been the highest paid person at Xerox. And he was one of the classic guys of all times. I've answered your question, I think. It's what's
next.
No,
you haven't. It was exactly what I was looking for. And I think it explains a lot of why you were so successful is that, you hire good people and you put your trust in them to do what they're expected to do. You create a culture that aligns everyone's incentives, and you're willing to do everything within the organization. You're not asking people to do something that you're not willing to do yourself. I think it's also a credit to your modest upbringing and how you lifted yourself up by your bootstraps. That you're not afraid to get your hands dirty.
Background, I could have empathy with almost anybody.
Right.
Going. Having been as poor as I was, a kid with my background or a person with my background, we had shared experiences. Went to Harvard Business School where everybody graduated from Princeton. I had that experience as well.
Right.
It's an interesting, so you're really lucky. I tell people, young people, I get a lot of questions about people from from fine backgrounds. So what do I do to make my kid, learn? Put him in an uncomfortable position. Send him to Knowles. Send him to Outward Bound, Knowles National Leadership School.
Right.
Get him a job in a psychiatric hospital in Kentucky or some other damn thing, or send him to Bangladesh. I got a friend who does spinal surgery in Ethiopia. I would be his assistant for the summer, or, that kind of thing. But you're right. You, John, you're very good. You picked out all the things I said. I kind of strung them all together. It's really, and being able to give people credit. Make sure they understand that you're not trying to take the credit. Give them the credit and also the compensation. One of the problems is if you even give them the credit, they say, well, thanks for the credit. Where's the money? And so you got to make sure you give them the money too. And of course, I did the one thing which I still think ties everybody together. Everybody owned a piece of the rock.
Right. Yeah, I think, and I usually give Anthony a hard time on these talks, but two of the things that you just mentioned are things that he drills into us here at Skybridge. One, he has a plaque. I'm actually sitting in his office in our New York headquarters right now. There's a plaque. Ronald Reagan said, "It's amazing what you can accomplish, essentially, if you don't care who gets the credit." And also leave, he learned this.
I don't like John getting the credit for all these good ratings on Salt Talks, though, Hajim. I got to be honest.
Enough is enough, right?
Yes, exactly. It can only go so far. Okay, I just want to make that clear. But go ahead, John. John took it a little bit too literally, Hajim.
And then the second piece is from Li Ka-shing. He writes about this in one of his books. Is he asked Li Ka-shing, "What is one lesson that you would give me in my career to help me be successful?" And Li Ka-shing told him, leave money on the table for your partners. Don't try to squeeze every dime or every penny out of every transaction that you do with your partners. Give them more than they even might expect, and you're going to have, a partner for life and somebody who's going to be a lifelong advocate for you and someone who can unlock value for you.
I'll give you another idea, all right, which I did unconsciously. Deflect credit. They try to give it to you. When I was the chairman I'm president of the Alumni Association, Harvard Business School, they wanted to throw a day for me after I was on the board for 10 years, and we did do a lot of really good things. We did this lifelong learning process, which really actually was very spectacular. They were going to give me a day, so that day was my day. I developed a video for Christine, who was the assistant director of alumni relations, who was absolutely fantastic. And so I did a video on her and her life and how she helped us and everything else. And after that session, which I did get a lot of credit, one of the women, very senior ladies at Harvard Business School, came up and said, "That's the classiest thing I've ever seen." And I did it unconsciously because I really thought that Christine Fairchild, fabulous lady. And she basically, I quit the board originally because I felt it was just a resume builder. She came after me, said, "You got to come back on the board. It's more than a resume builder." I went on those first 2 years, then another 8 years, and I became this president of the Alumni Association, but I deflected it. Same thing I did when I left as the chairman of the board of trustees at Rochester. I did something which I think, I think you should copy. And I asked the president for 40 minutes, and I gave him a book called This is My Moment, which is a book about gratitude. And I also got crystal pieces, and on it I put each person's name, University of Rochester, and thanks, Ed. And I said, this is a thank you that can never be destroyed and can never go away. What you've done for me as a board. We raised $1.3 billion, which was that's a whole story. What you've done for me and for this school should be remembered forever. And that's why I want to say thanks forever. But, deflecting credit, Yurli Kaoshing is exactly right. Leave something on the table. By the way, on deals, it's the same way. I remember the Xerox deal. I didn't push that. I did push the ING deal a little bit because I felt they were undervaluing me. I knew what the price they were willing to pay from one of my competitors. So I knew that was in their pocket. So I figured I'd take that. But I left that on the table. And also I feel very, very confident. I tried to give back to both Xerox and ING. If you read the book, both people, you felt that it was an overpaid deal. In each case, they both did just fine if you read the book. So I'm kind of excited about that. But those are the kinds of little bit of lessons. But marry those two things, helping people do better than they think they can and not taking the credit and even deflecting the credit. Boy, I tell you, it really works. And it's unconscious. It sounds like manipulation. I did it unconsciously. And writing this book and thinking back basically at Rochester when I started the book, I started to realize that was what I was doing unconsciously. And by the way, I did it because I got a kick out of it. When someone comes into your office and says, I just did this unbelievable deal that you may have really helped them with or her with, and you see them light up, that really turns you on. Or in the case of kids at college, when I got this, by the way, the book looks like to me, could be, I'm hoping, I got some emails back from some what we call foster home kids up in Boston who basically are with a group called Wiley. They are counseled by this group called Wiley, and they're in places like MIT and Harvard and Tufts and so forth. And I got a couple letters, emails after one of my talks saying, Ed, you really inspired me to keep going. That pays all the bills, pays all the bills. You get so much more than you give, no matter what.
Yep.
John, thank you for summarizing. He's pretty good there, Tony. I don't know about you.
Finally, get somebody on to ask the good questions,
This is the last time you'll see him on Salt Talk. You're fired, Darcy. You're fired.
So he needs to read your book again, Ed.
In all seriousness, though, Ed, not only is he good at this, but he's also the head curator of our SALT conference, which are 2 live events that we were doing prior to the pandemic. And so, we've downloaded a lot of responsibility to John. He's done a brilliant job. And
hey, John, I give you great empathy. My daughter is a curator for TED Talks, the business part of TED Talks. It's one of the toughest jobs ever. It's like being a Broadway producer with only one night stands. Really, it's very tough.
Yeah, no, I mean, we strive to be in the stratosphere of TED Talks. Salt Talks is what we call our series, and it's modeled after TED Talks. I think obviously what she's done there to contribute to the success of that organization, I'm sure is amazing. I want to ask you one more question. There's too much wisdom here for me to let you go early. So we're going to go right up to the end of our allotted time here, but it's about the future. And, you've talked a lot about how you talked about the lily pad. You talked about, if you don't jump off the lily pad to the next lily pad, you're going to get left behind. And I think generationally, there's a lot of people on Wall Street in the industry who don't think that way and are trying to hold on to the past. You see companies like a Coinbase. I don't know how familiar you are with digital currency, Bitcoin and all that stuff. That's going to go live and be $100+ billion company. You have Stripe, which is a private, payments company that's worth $100 billion already in private markets. Both of those either bumping into or exceeding the market cap of a company like Goldman Sachs. But as you look out into the landscape, where do you see the puck moving, to use an overused cliche, in terms of Wall Street, in terms of fintech's disruption of old Wall Street? And how would you give advice to CEOs of some of these legacy organizations in terms of how not to get left behind?
Change it's corny, but change is accelerating. But there's more opportunity now than ever before, but you got to keep changing. I mean, the fact that Furman would not accept the fact that institutional was going to take over from retail and be more important, or that he wouldn't marry the research department, to his bankers and so forth. And the fact that Glucksman wouldn't recognize that asset management was the next step. I don't know how big we could have been. We went from $2 billion to $10 billion in 2.5 years with the Lehman name. I could have been I could have been BlackRock, if he left us alone, maybe. Right. Anyway, today, AI, VR, AR, genomics, biotech, all this stuff that Wall Street has to finance over the next, 20, 30 years. There's a book by Julian called 2030, which is terribly statistical. And after I'm reading fiction for the first time in my life, so that some of the nonfiction I'm reading is not not as juicy as fiction. But 2030, the next 10 years, what he talks about, the kinds of changes that are going on, Wall Street has to accept. I'm not an owner of cryptocurrency because I'm an old fogey. But I now recognize that's very, very important. And people, when I traded in the over-the-counter market in the 60s, people said, "What are you doing? You're not going to trade over-the-counter stocks, are you?" The spreads were so wonderful that my over-the-counter desk made more money than anybody else because I had these 40 guys from Staten Island all trading over-the-counter stuff, Anyway, so I think that today Wall Street has more opportunity than ever before, but it's going to be different. The problem with Wall Street today is that you have too many very large companies. And, when you're competing against very large companies, it's just very difficult to operate. But you're getting some new company like Coinbase. I mean, there'll be other programs like that. I'm recommending most young people, unless they're really really get excited about finance. There's so many other opportunities today. Plus, the world is now 3 or 4 times as big as it's been before. International is possible. And internet gives you access to all that. Find a wave, find a cycle, find a trend, find an unsatisfied demand, or find a need that's going to be satisfied in the next 20 years. You're going to have a lot of fun. Wall Street is very, JP Morgan's a fantastic company. It's just hard to compete against. And Coinbase has done it, but it's going to be the exception rather than a rule. That's going to be, I think that, and in many respects, the financial business have topped out to some extent. I mean, automobiles have not been so good for a very long time, except for Tesla. It's been a tough one. How many automobile companies now? There's so few. There are only 2 or 3 in America today. So I think that working for the financial business shouldn't be drawing as many young people as it drew when I was in school. So I think that basically my advice would be you should have some group of people in every large company in a skunk works, like Minnesota Mining, thinking about what's next and be willing to spend money on it. And don't throw out anything. Don't throw out any idea and have it separate from your company. And basically say, and this is what Capital Research did with me. They threw me out and they said, "You got to go to Greenwich to do a growth fund." Oh, we can't have that here. in Los Angeles. I mean, growth funds, income fund, income only over there, Greenwich, and they did that. And of course, I flunked badly. You'll see that in the book. I got the terminal disease called hubris, and they brought it back in. But the Growth Fund of America, which I found and started, ended up being the largest mutual fund in the country at one point in time, even bigger than Fidelity for a period of time. An income fund I think it's nearly 100 billion today. But that was the completion of the product line. So today, let's get those skunk works working. Don't throw out anything. And unfortunately, which is one of the most difficult things, it's international. You must be international. And unfortunately, New York has given away its prominence. I complain about America in a couple of veins. We should have never given away that marketplace. We should have kept it. We should have sponsored it. Now, when there was a point in time, you couldn't do $100 million, bigger than $100 million deal outside the United States. Now, Hong Kong can do it. London can do it. So you got to be international, and you got to get people that are willing to get on it, the plane and get out and go to see those places. And you have to have international employees constantly. And there are two ways to do that. Even little Furman Selz ended up with office in Tokyo, Sydney, and San Francisco. Those all those foreign places, and London. We had a big office in London. I remember going to Tokyo to visit my office, and I bumped into Bob Greenhill from Morgan Stanley, and he said, "You're here. What are you doing?" I said, "I'm visiting my office." He said, "So am I." I said, "How many people do you have?" He said, 800. He said, "How many do you have?" I said, 1.
But in a world of remote work, having a global distributed workforce has gotten easier.
That's the last thing. That's the last thing. Today, people in the financial business are recognize that COVID, like every other difficult situation, has huge positives. Telemedicine is going to explode. FinTech, just what you mentioned. But EdTech, FinTech, and MedTech are going to be just huge explosive areas. And it may not require as much capital. We may have to sort of change things a bit. Funding may have to be smaller, and there may be some new businesses that all these companies go into. And some may be too small for some of the big companies. So some of the smaller companies can do a better job.
All right. Well, Ed, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. We'll have to meet up on the golf course or at the SALT conference. I know Anthony's not much of a golfer, but I'd love to tee it up with you either down there in Ocean Reef or Nantucket, or you can come see us on Long Island.
Well, where in Long Island?
I'm up actually in the town that Anthony grew up in, Port Washington.
And what's the name of the club?
The club that I play is called Sands Point Golf Club.
Oh, I've heard of it.
It's a Tillinghast, beautiful Linksy style course. It's great, just around the corner from my house.
Well, if you get to Nantucket, I'll give you an afternoon at the Nantucket Golf Club. Anthony, you can come. We can sit. We let them play, and we can sit and watch them. All right.
Anthony can do the landscaping before we play.
Yeah, see that he's going to want me out there pulling the weeds. Hajim. That's how these guys are,
No, but it's a sanctuary.
Listen, it's an absolutely breathtaking course. I was up there with Wayne Huizenga, the legendary Wayne Huizenga, in 1997, and it was the year that he had won the World Series. I remember he took the Florida Marlins when he owned it to the World Series in '97, and then eventually sold the team. But absolutely legendary, beautiful course. Ed, On the Road Less Traveled, amazing book, an unlikely journey from an orphanage to the boardroom. And I love the cover, Ed, but I love more of the content of what's in this book, and I'm recommending it to everybody. And I want to thank you personally on behalf of all of us for joining Salt Talk today.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time and the good questions. It was a lot of fun. Thanks very much.
Likewise. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in to today's Salt Talk with the great Ed Hajim. Just a reminder, if you missed any part of this talk or any of our previous talks, you can access them on our website at salt.org/talks or on our YouTube channel, which is called SaltTube. We've made all of these episodes free and available for everyone to watch. So please spread the word. We love educating people, young and old, from great people like Ed, who have incredible lessons to teach from their long careers, successful careers on Wall Street and elsewhere. Just a reminder, we're also on social media at SALT Conference is where we're most active on Twitter, and we'd love for you to give us a follow. But we're also on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook as well. But on behalf of Anthony and the entire SALT team, this is John Darcy signing off from SALT Talks for today. We hope to see you back here again soon.